Don't miss these life-changing truths from Pastor Adam Burton's latest sermon at Central Baptist Church.
Did you know that right now some of the wealthiest and most brilliant people on earth are pouring billions of dollars into defeating death? Bioengineering to stop aging. Brain-computer interfaces designed to upload human consciousness. Private colonies on Mars as a backup drive for the human race in case Earth fails. The engineering's remarkable, but the psychology underneath it is the same fear that built the tower. We are fragile, we're mortal, we're vulnerable to being dispersed and erased. So what do? We stack bricks. Nobody builds a tower because they feel secure. We've watched God speak a world into existence and saw humanity break it. Then we see God refuse to let it stay broken. There's 11 chapters we've been in, the creation, the fall, a flood that swallows everything, and 8 people walk off an ark onto dry ground with a clean world in front of them and the same hearts they boarded with. And now we're at the last wide-angle shot before everything narrows. Because after this, Genesis locks in on one man, a man named Abraham. One family chosen out of all of the scattered ones with one line that runs all the way to the Messiah. But before that happens, God gives us one more look at the entire human race. What does humanity do on its own after the flood with a clean world in front of them and a clear mandate? Genesis chapter 10 answers that with a list. There are 70 nations spreading across the known world, each one with their own language and territory. Most of us, we skip it on the way to the story that we came for, and that story is Genesis 11. There's a plain in the land of Shinar. There's a city with a large tower, and one sentence buried in verse 4 tells us exactly what's driving all of it. Lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. That's not ambition, that is fear, and God tears it down. So the one thing that I want you to take away from today is that the tower we build for security is the very thing God has to tear down to give us any. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Genesis chapter 11 this morning. The first thing that we see in our passage is that we build to belong. Now, before we get to the tower, I want us to spend a moment in chapter 10 because Moses is showing us the world as God designed it. There are 70 nations, each with their own language and territory. Japheth's descendants spread north and west toward the coastlands. Ham's line moves south into Africa and east into Mesopotamia, and Shem's descendants settling in the Middle East. Moses saves Shem's line for the last because it's going somewhere. It's a world that is filling and spreading out exactly as God intended. Now, before we go any further, the structure of these 2 chapters can feel confusing if you're reading it carefully. Because chapter 10 already shows 70 nations dispersed across the earth, each with their own language. And then in chapter 11, it opens with everyone sharing one language again. Now Moses arranged it this way deliberately because he wants us to see the world as God designed it before he shows us exactly how humanity refused it. So let's go to Genesis chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Now I want you to focus on that word settled. God told Noah and his sons after him to fill the earth, to spread out and go. The mandate goes all the way back to creation, and then God repeated it after the flood. It's the same command in the same direction out. And what does humanity do with it? They find a nice flat valley and they stop moving. Look at verse 3. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Now there's no stone in Mesopotamia, so they invented kiln-fired bricks. There's no mortar either, so they used bitumen, naturally occurring tar pulled straight from the ground. Real engineering solutions to real problems. So what do they propose? Well, look at verse 4. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." Now, right there, in the middle of that sentence, is the real confession. Lest we be dispersed. Everything before it is the response to everything after it. They don't have a destination. They have a threat that they're running from. What the ancient reader would have recognized immediately is something that we would probably miss. The tower isn't just a tall building. In ancient Mesopotamia, towers like this were called ziggurats, massive stepped structures, each crowned with a small temple at the top. The most famous one in Babylon is called Etemenaki, which means temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. You can see the remains of the foundation there in Iraq today. At the very top, the ancient text tells us, there was a small furnished room. There's a bed with a table set for a meal. The theology spelled out plainly. If you build God a house and set his table, if you make him comfortable, then he'll be obligated to come down and to bless your city. Now, it's a very old idea. It didn't start in Mesopotamia either. It started in a garden when two people decided the way to get what they wanted was to reach for it themselves rather than trust the one who made them. The tower is just a larger version of the same move. If you build something impressive enough, manage the divine presence carefully enough, and maybe you can secure your own future without depending on anyone. And these people are fresh off a global catastrophe. The flood isn't a distant memory for them. Some of them were likely living at the time of the flood at this time. So they do what frightened people do when they don't fully trust the one who judged it. They gather and they build something permanent so that the ground can't swallow them again. Now, we understand this, maybe a little better than we'd like to admit. Did you know that right now some of the wealthiest and most brilliant people on earth are pouring billions of dollars into defeating death? Bioengineering to stop aging. Brain-computer interfaces designed to upload human consciousness. Private colonies on Mars as a backup drive for the human race in case Earth fails. The engineering's remarkable, but the psychology underneath it is the same fear that built the tower. We are fragile. We're mortal. We're vulnerable to being dispersed and erased. So what do? We stack bricks. And it's not only billionaires. We know what it feels like. Lying awake at 2 a.m., running through everything in our minds that could go wrong. Saying yes when you mean no because you just can't afford the alternative. Smiling at the right people and avoiding the wrong ones and calling it life. But listen to what's running underneath all of it. Lest we be dispersed, lest we be forgotten. That's Babel. And Babel isn't ancient history. It's the default setting of every human heart that hasn't found something better to trust. The next thing we see is that God will not let our towers stand. Now let's pick it up here in verse 5. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. They built a tower with its top in the heavens, A structure that's so massive and carefully engineered, it's meant to close the distance between earth and sky. And God had to come down to see it. He had to descend from where he actually lives just to get a look at the thing they thought would reach him. Moses is laughing. It is deliberate. The tower they bragged would touch the heaven doesn't even register from where God stands. The greatest architectural achievement in the ancient world is from God's vantage point, something that he has to go looking for. So whatever we built, however impressive it looks from the ground, it doesn't reach. It never did. But God doesn't laugh and walk away. He assesses it seriously. Look at verse 6. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. So God looks at this tower and he sees past the bricks entirely. What he sees is a direction. And their direction is the problem. Because these are people with a real capability and coordination pointed entirely away from what he made them for. And if this continues, nothing will stop them from going wherever that direction leads. Right? And we see that the flood already shows us where it leads. It leads to depravity. It accelerates. God isn't protecting his throne here. What he's doing is he's protecting humanity from the destination of its own trajectory. So what does he do? He comes down. Look at verse 7. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. Now notice the language here. Come, let us. The builders said the same thing in verse 3. Come, let us make bricks. Come, let us build. God uses the exact same construction and turns it back on them. They mimicked God in their planning, and God mimics them in his judgment. It's one of the sharpest moves in the entire passage. So he goes after the root of the whole project. Because if you pull out the shared language, the tower stops itself. Because the builders can't finish what they can't talk about. And so we pick it up in verse 8. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. So we see that God enforces the command they refused. Fill the earth, they said no, but God made them. You see, the dispersal they feared becomes the very thing that happens anyway, just now through judgment instead of their obedience. They wanted a name. Verse 9 gives them one, Babel. The Babylonians called their city Babili, the gate of God. And Moses takes that proud name and he connects it to the Hebrew word for confusion. Instead of a monument to human greatness, now the city becomes an eternal marker of failed ambition. They got a name, just not the one they were building for. Now, it would be easy to read all of this, to look like God is just being mean to them. These people, they've been through a lot. They came through the flood, and now they just wanted to stay together. They just wanted to matter, and God broke them up. What kind of father does that? The kind of father who knows what their children are actually building toward. Because the judgment at Babel is fatherly restraint. God looks at where this is heading, and he does what any father would do when his children are running toward a cliff. He stops them the only way that would actually work. Because a people unified in fear, building a religion of transaction and constructing a system designed to manage God rather than to trust him. That's a people accelerating toward another flood-level catastrophe. Now look, loss is real. Not every collapse is redemptive, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise, but some of it is God refusing to let us stay in Shinar, refusing to let us keep building the thing that felt like security but was running on the same fear that drove the tower builders. Because the tower has to fall. Not because God is against us, but because he knows what we are building for, and he has something better in mind. Lastly, we see that he gives us what we are building for. He gives us what we were building for. The story doesn't end at Babel. Genesis 11 disperses humanity across the earth. And then the very next thing Moses does is trace a genealogy. Shem's line, carefully followed name by name, generation by generation, until it lands on one man, Terah. Terah had a son whose name was Abram. You see, the dispersal wasn't the end of the story. It just cleared the ground for the next move. Now slow down and feel the irony that Moses is building toward the entire time. Because the builders in Shinar had one consuming ambition. They wanted a Shem. That's the Hebrew word sitting behind the English translation name in verse 4. A Shem, a reputation, a legacy, permanence, something that would survive the dispersal they feared. They baked bricks and hauled bitumen and stacked stones toward the sky, all of it in a desperate pursuit of a Shem that would outlast them. And God dispersed them without a second glance to the tower. But then the camera pulls back and we see what God was quietly doing the whole time. While the tower builders were stacking bricks, God was tracing a genealogy. One unbroken line running through a man whose actual given name was Shem, son of Noah, ancestor of the Hebrews, the man that the whole table of nations was building toward. The builders tried to manufacture a name through technology and ambition and a unified human effort, and God walked past all of it and gave the name freely to a descendant of the man who already carried it. Moses is laughing at Babel one final time. And then in Genesis 12, immediately after all of this, God speaks to Abram. Listen to what he says. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. God is going to give Abram exactly what the tower builders were trying to take. A great name, a future that can't be dispersed, security that doesn't depend on bricks. The builders grabbed for it with everything they had, and God walked up and set it down in front of Abram freely. And if you follow that thread further, because the story doesn't stop with Abraham. Centuries later in Acts chapter 2, there's a room full of people who've just watched Jesus die and come back. They're waiting as he told them to. And then the Holy Spirit falls. Now, something happens that every Jewish reader in that room would have recognized when people from every nation under heaven, each one hearing the gospel in their own language. You have the Parthians, the Medes, Elamites, the Mesopotamians. It's the same geography as the table of nations in Genesis 10. The same diversity that came out of Babel is now gathered into one place, each one hearing the mighty works of God in their own tongue. At Babel, one language fractures into many and the people scatter in confusion. Yet at Pentecost, all of those languages become the vehicle for a single message and they gather in worship. God didn't reverse what happened at Babel. He redeemed it. And every language that came out of that dispersal becomes, at Pentecost, a way to say Jesus is Lord. The dispersal that the builders feared was the very thing that had to happen in order to set up the mission. And here's what that means for us. The same Spirit that fell in that upper room, the one that took fishermen and tax collectors and frightened people hiding behind locked doors and sent them out to a world that spoke dozens of languages, that same Spirit lives in every single person in this room who belongs to Christ. We sang about it this morning. I love to tell the story. We have a story to tell to the nations. Those aren't just hymns. They are a description of what we've been giving and what we've been sent to do. The builders at Babel used their words to build a monument to themselves. Every conversation advancing the project, every relationship managed to protect the tower, and the result was confusion, so complete that they couldn't finish a sentence. We've been given something different. A name that carries actual power. A story that crosses every language barrier Babel ever created. A Spirit who makes us capable of exactly what the tower builders were trying to manufacture on their own. And we know where it's all heading. The city the builders of Babel were trying to construct with their own hands already exists. It's being built by someone who doesn't need our bricks. The New Jerusalem, whose gates stand open to every nation, whose light is the Lamb unto itself. Every people group scattered at Babel, every language that came out of that dispersal, every tribe and tongue from every corner of the earth, all of it gathered finally into one city whose architect is God. The city is the destination, and the mission is the road that leads there. So what does it look like from where we are standing right now? It looks like the coworker you've been afraid to talk to about Jesus because you don't want it to be awkward. It looks like the neighbor whose name you know, but whose story you've never asked about. It looks like the family member you've been managing at a safe distance because the conversation feels too risky. The builders said, lest we be dispersed. Jesus says, go. It's the same movement with a completely different heart because they were running from something and we've been given something worth running toward. A name worth carrying and a story worth telling, a city worth pointing people toward, and a Spirit powerful enough to make sure it lands. I'll invite Tammy to come at this time. The genealogy at the end of Genesis 11, it's easy to rush past. We have more names, more numbers that seem to slow the story down right before it's getting somewhere. But read it what it actually is. It's a thread, a single unbroken line running from Shem, the son of Noah, all the way down through 11 generations to one man, Terah. And Terah had a son named Abram. The dispersal at Babel didn't end God's plan. It cleared the ground for it. Because what God is about to do in Genesis chapter 12 is the answer everything Genesis 3 through 11 has been diagnosing. Humanity keeps reaching for a name, for a city, and a security it can build and own and control. We had the flood, the tower, the confusion, the dispersal. Every single one of them is God refusing to let the story end in Shinar. And then Abram. God comes to this man, a descendant of Shem, living in the Ur of the Chaldeans, the same region of Shinar. And he says something remarkable to him. Leave. Go out. I'll show you where when you get there. no blueprint, no tower, just a command to go out without knowing where, and a promise that God himself will provide what Babel was trying to manufacture. I will make your name great. I will make you a great nation. Through you, all of the families of earth will be blessed. Every family, every language that came out of Babel, every people group dispersed across the face of the earth, God doesn't give up on them at Babel. He chooses one man to go toward them all. And that line, the one running from Shem through Abram, it keeps going. It runs through Isaac and Jacob, through Judah and David, through exile and return and 400 years of silence until it lands on a baby in Bethlehem. The tower builders, they tried to close the distance between earth and heaven with bricks and bitumen, but God closed it himself in flesh by coming down. This time, he comes down to do something the tower builders never imagined. He comes to dismantle it from the inside. Jesus lived the life of someone who never built a tower. He had the name before the world began, and he laid it down willingly. He had a circle, and he kept expanding it toward people that nobody else wanted. He had every reason to protect what was his, and instead gave it all anyway. And then on Friday afternoon, they nailed him to a cross, and he let them, because the only way to give us the name that we could never build was to take the shame that we fully deserved. He was dispersed so we could be gathered. He was scattered so that we could be found. He was forsaken for 3 hours so we would never be forsaken by God for a single moment. The city he's been building didn't fall with him. The New Jerusalem, whose gates stand open to every nation and whose light is the Lamb himself, is still under construction, and it's never coming down. Because that city is real and it is coming. And every person in this room is either headed there or needs to be. That's the gospel. It's not a self-improvement program. It's not a moral framework. It is an announcement that the thing that you've been trying to build toward has already been secured by someone else at a cost you couldn't have paid. And it's being offered to you right now as a free gift. Some of you have been building for a long time. The career, the reputation, the carefully managed image, the circle drawn tight around you to make you feel safe. And underneath all of it, if you're honest, is the same fear that built the tower. Lest I be dispersed, lest I be forgotten. Jesus is standing at the edge of your Shinar right now, and he's saying the same thing he said to Abram. Leave, come. I'll show you where when you get there. If you've never given your life to Christ, today is the day. Not because you have it figured out, not because you've cleaned yourself up enough, but because the tower you've been building toward will never hold. And he's offering you something that will. So stop constructing and start trusting. That's the whole thing. And if you've been a believer for years, but you walked in here today still building, still managing, still white-knuckling the thing that you're most afraid of losing, hear this. The name is already written. The city is already being built. You've been given the same Spirit that turned a room full of frightened people into witnesses who crossed every language barrier Babel ever created. That Spirit is in you. The story, it's yours to tell. And the name is yours to carry. So stop building towers and go tell people about the city. In a moment, we're going to sing. As we do, I'll be standing right down here at the front. Today is the day you stop building and start trusting. Come. If you want to give your life to Christ for the first time, then come. If you've been a believer, but you've been living like someone hasn't heard this yet, then come. Let's talk. You don't need to have it all figured out first. Abram didn't either. I'm Pastor Adam Burton from Central Baptist Church. I want to personally thank you for watching our sermon today. It means so much to us that you've taken time to connect with God's Word through our ministry. If this message encouraged you, I invite you to explore more about our church at cbcmaysville.com. You'll find resources, upcoming events, and ways to get involved. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram for more content like this. We'd love to stay connected with you and to continue to grow together in faith. Thanks again for watching. God bless you, and I hope to see you soon, either online or in person.